Warning. The following content may contain elements that are not suitable for some audiences. Viewer discretion is advised.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, night, late in the middle of the night, or whenever you're watching this. I was up at 4:30 in the morning watching some videos, so I know some of you are as well. Welcome to another episode of Whispered Insights, the show where everything that happens, or whatever the hell. I don't have a tagline, so that's all you get. Anyways, thanks for being here today. We have a fantastic show today. We have some great shows coming up. Let me take 2 minutes to tell you what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks. Next week, we have the inimitable, fantastic, awesome Dr. Lauren Vargas talking to the inimitable, awesome, fantastic Trisha Wang. And they're going to be talking about the evolving landscape of AI skills. And do we have what we need to actually take advantage of AI? What's missing? What's necessary? What are we going to see over the next few decades? And finally, is it really going to be the decade of AI over the next decade? If they're not going to talk about that, that's what I actually said they're going to talk about. So hopefully they'll change their show for next week. That will be next week. The week after that, we have a former Gartner colleague, Esteban. She's going to be coming to talk about ditching transformation in favor of smaller innovations. Do you really need a whole-blown, full-on transformation project, or can you actually take on smaller projects and succeed equally well? And we're going to have that conversation in a couple of weeks. So today, we are talking to the Brohaimer, the one, the only, Mr. Jonathan Reed. And the crowd goes wild. Welcome.
Cool. I brought
cool, that's all you get to say.
I brought my bullshit detector.
Awesome. So the topic
Let's
today.
See how we do.
So here's the thing. I've been following what you read, and I've been following your newsletter. Not the newsletter, the reader that you send, the Genomic reader feed that you send. And I've seen a lot of really cool stuff coming up about leadership and about talking about the evolution of business and everything in there. And you and I were chatting a couple of weeks ago, and I told you what the topic would be, and we came up to the conclusion that we can build a framework for executive decision making, right? Now, when I started the show, this was all about executive decision making. It was about whispering the insights to the right executives so they can make the right decisions, so they can actually take the company to the next level. So that was very interesting to me. So in talking to you, we decided that we'll probably take more than about 1,000 shows to get through the whole process, but it's a good place to start. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to start this and then continue over the next few weeks trying to figure out what's that framework for executive decision making. Sounds good? Sounds good. So let's get started. How do we do it?
Well, it's interesting. It's an interesting and challenging dilemma, and I have spent a lot of time on this topic. I have some passion for it because this kind of extends far beyond the scope of the show, but I spent a lot of time studying the impact of disinformation on society. And by the way, AI has done a lot of serious harm to that already. In the so-called algorithmic economy, way before generative AI came along.
Yeah.
And so I've become fascinated by what does it take to be a functioning citizen in such an economy. And the problem is that if you distrust everything, then you have no way forward. And so you have to figure out how to sharpen your BS filter, as I've written about, but also be a discerning reader and figure out how to validate all sources and how to make sense of the world. And so what I did in some Diginomica articles is I looked at that from more of an enterprise perspective, and I'm pretty optimistic about the enterprise in a certain sense. So I've written about how does the enterprise have a fake news problem, and I started with the conclusion that it has a kind of fake news problem because there's a lot of vendor BS and propaganda out there, and a lot of marketing budgets spend a lot of money hyping up tech that isn't quite ready, or even if it's ready, it might not be appropriate. So there is a bit of a fake news problem, but the good news is it can't be a complete fake news cycle in the enterprise because our careers both individually and collectively are based on getting some successful projects across the finish line. And that's good news for you and me, because our job is to try to help people with that. And so there's work out there for us to do this, and people want to understand. And so I came to that conclusion. And then just real quick, and I'll turn it back over to you. I like the pathway for individuals who want to do this. And I think my articles have really articulated a methodology, if you will, for individuals who want to approach this in an enterprise context and make better decisions. What gets a lot tougher, of course, is how you scale that inside of organizations, and how do you take an individual practice around that topic and put it to work with enterprise data in a broader context with your teams and inside of your organization's culture. And that's the harder problem, and that's the one that will take 1,000 shows to solve.
So your articles and your writing talks a lot about the BS filter, and I want to talk about that in a couple of minutes. But first, I want to start with one part of something you just said, which is disinformation from vendors and suppliers and providers and integrators and partners, basically an ecosystem of disinformation that is built for the enterprise. Not on purpose, but also not really by mistake, right? I mean, we don't want to lie, but hey, we make more money if we do it that way. So, but isn't there a difference between full-on disinformation that is sort of nowhere, that somebody pulls out of their ass, and just basically stretching the truth in a marketing way? And if there's a difference, then how is a leader to recognize the difference between, oh, my company will give you AI out of the box, to look, we figure out a way to connect to an AI library, but we're not sure how to use it, but we'll call it AI because that's what sells right now. Isn't there a difference between those two statements, and how do we differentiate in there?
Yeah, there is a difference, and I think that's one reason why one of the objectives behind my work, and I think your work, and I think a lot of us who care about this, is to try to help be resources to help people ask the right questions and encourage them to be able to dig past this and basically, show me. I mean, one of my big things in my inbox is show me, right? So when I hear, oh, my bot can do this and that, I always tell them, and they're like, can we get an executive on to tell you about this? I'm like, no, I want to try your bot. Like, where's the demo? Where, let me try this myself, and I will tell you what I think of it. And it's amazing how few people come back even from that simple line of request, right? And so, depending on what a vendor is telling you, there are things you can counter with to get sort of to the bottom of whether this is going to work in your context. And of course, there's also things you can do inside your industry to look at other companies that have done similar work. And there's everything from Glassdoor to review sites, which are not perfect. Some of the review sites are a little massaged, but they can give you some sense of what the pros and cons of going ahead with a particular vendor or project are. And so a lot of this is on us to not get caught up. I think the problem is that sometimes we get caught up in the excitement of these so-called game-changing technologies. And I understand that. I think you'd have to be a fool not to claim, not to accept the fact that some of these technologies, especially the Gen I variety, are really fun to play around with. If you want to hey, I'm going to turn this into a cartoon, I'm going to do, whatever, write me a Shakespearean sonnet about, I don't know, sustainability in the enterprise, and it will do that. And I mean, look, that's kind of fun. So but the problem is always fun, yes. Enterprise grade, enterprise ready, no. And this is where we have to be kind of curmudgeonly, Esteban, and be like, well, this is an enterprise grade. You can do this. You can finish a homework assignment with this, but you can't do this inside your enterprise.
But isn't that, and it's really hard for me to be a curmudgeon, but I'll try my best. But
yeah, I know it's a real struggle for you.
It's really strange.
Yeah.
But isn't that, what you just said? I mean, learn to differentiate between what's real and what's not. I mean, the concept of the BS filter that you keep promoting, and like Alan is saying here, right? It's a team sport. We need to vet, but also producers need to be vetable, right? We need to actually include both. So this all goes to the source of the information is this the most important part of making the decision, making sure that he got the right information from the right people, that he can vet it, that he can ask to see their chatbot and get this stupid refund that a chatbot promised you because he didn't know what to say, which, by the way, that was before Gen AI and LLM. So that was a regular chatbot, not a Gen AI's
right.
GPT, not a GPT chatbot. But, isn't that just going back to basically kindergarten level enterprise, information management?
Well, I mean, that's a fairly harsh way perhaps of putting it. I think a different way of looking at it is that all of us get a little bit caught up in our particular point of view, in our particular so-called narrative or or agenda or culture. And so one of the things that I've talked with you about in past shows, and I'm a big believer in, is you need these systems of accountability built into what you do. And when I talk about like forming a good BS filter, a big part of it is developing a network of people both inside and crucially outside your organization that you can turn to and get gut checks on various aspects of what you're working on. And that could go from informal, like the informal kind of network that we all build, where like I'll give you a call and you'll tell me, man, that was bullshit what you wrote last week, or I'll give you a call and give you a hard time about a show or whatever. Like that's one thing, is just honest people that you trust who know their shit. But then the second part of it is you can formalize some of that too and say, okay, if we're going to do this particular type of chatbot project, maybe we should have someone in here who has advised past companies on this, or can look at what the risk management aspects are. And essentially what we're talking about is that when in a typical enterprise project, the biggest risk is that if everyone shares the same commercial agenda, the dissenting views don't come out very often, because
Right.
everyone wants to go forward, right? The partner wants to go forward, the vendor wants to go forward, and the customer's excited to let's go ahead. And the idea that you would have someone with a different point of view in the room and empower that person to say, hey, here's how we're going to audit this, here's how we're going to check the project progress of this, and validate these claims. That's not necessarily a real popular thing, but I think like that's the key there, is realizing that you can get too caught up in a certain kind of tunnel vision. And that certainly goes for decision making and data, which is kind of what we're honing in on a little bit, which is like how can we make better decisions collectively. And like I said, I think it's easier to solve that as an individual than it is as a collective.
So then we're starting to structure the BS filter essentially, right? I mean, we look at the right sources, we look for ways to validate and vet the right sources and information provided. We look for like what's going to happen. I mean, we had the show with Les Miller last year where we discussed exactly what he said. When everybody's in the same agenda, how do you become the person who says, no, this doesn't smell right, we're not going to do this, and then have them be heard. And Liz said that we need to have somebody in the organization that can do that, and I agree with that as well. So all these pieces are nothing new. I mean, we've been talking about this for a while. So how are we evolving thanks to AI, or in despite of AI or in lieu of AI? How are we evolving in actually creating this availability of information to make better decisions?
Well, I'm not sure that the AI is like a net positive or negative here, but I would say there's ways it can help us and ways it can hurt us.
Okay. Let's talk about I mean, I don't care about the ways it can hurt us, because we can have a million stories of that. It's really easy. This generation of AI is so fucking shitty.
You want to know how AI can essentially help
I mean, this generation of AI is so fucking shitty. It has like no value whatsoever at this point.
Well, actually, I would modify that a little bit, Esteban, because I think what this generation of AI is very dependent on is the caliber of your internal data. And you need to really focus your AI project somewhere the data quality is high. And what I've seen in my own work is that when the data quality is high in a particular area, you can get some useful results. Now, that doesn't mean revolutionary results, but you can see some. We've documented a lot of these on Diginomica where, and we're not going to look for like AI promotions. It's just that there are examples. But this is where AI can be of help, because what AI does, because it's so dependent on the caliber of your data. In other words, the way to think about it is that these generative AI systems, if you try to apply them to an enterprise problem without infusing your own data into that architecture, you're going to get an unsatisfying result. So you have to be able to feed it your data. And if your data isn't quality data, then it's a garbage in, garbage out problem. So what AI essentially is doing here is it's forcing a data conversation. And the advantage of that from the perspective of you and me is that having quality data is not just helping us with AI. It's helping us with decision making. It's helping us with analytics. It's helping us with predictive frameworks. Okay. It's putting pressure on a data problem that has existed for a long time, which is that there's still way too many data silos. There's still way too many work being done in rogue environments, like whether it's rogue spreadsheets or whether it's non-integrated sales channels that aren't feeding back into a customer record. And as a result of that, you're not able to make good decisions in a corporate sense because you don't actually have good data at your fingertips. So one of the best things about AI in this generation of AI is that it's forcing a data conversation.
But then haven't we agreed forever that our data is not good or not really what it should
We
be?
have, but we haven't
Okay.
spent we haven't had the will and the fortitude to really solve those problems. And I think AI is forcing that issue.
And what is the outcome? I mean, what are we seeing that in relation to the show of like, uh, uh, executive decision making and building a framework? What is the outcome? I mean, if we improve the data, we improve the decision making.
I'm glad you asked that, Esteban. So
Oh my God, I'm so smart today.
so
I'm on fire.
so here's the thing that interests me, because I have spent a lot of time looking at like this from the vantage point of various types of enterprises. And what I find interesting is that for the most part, it's more in the smaller and medium sized enterprises that are having a little bit better luck with what we're talking about here than the larger. And the reason the large enterprises struggle with this is because large enterprises just have such a mess of applications and data structures that it's really, really very difficult to combine them into some kind of coherent whole. Sometimes you can do it in a various like focused area. But with smaller companies, for example, like I'll go to conferences in the sort of mid-market cloud ERP space, for example, or more mid-market analytics vendors where it is fair to say that they kind of have a single source of truth when they get done with these implementations. Now, single source of truth is obviously a dangerous phrase to overuse.
Yeah.
But the point is that when you talk with these companies, what's fascinating is that there's a journey that they have to go through that I find fascinating, where essentially what they're doing is they're accepting an agreed upon set of facts. And you can't really have good collective decision making without an agreed upon set of facts. And by the way, that's the reason why our culture and society is splintering and self-destructing, is because we no longer have that. When you combine like the left and the right, no one fundamentally agrees on anything, and so you can't solve problems.
Right.
So in an enterprise context, if you do have a platform that has most of your most important data in it, what that does for you is, first, you have to learn to trust that, right? And so I'll have some fascinating interviews where customers will tell me that at first different department heads would challenge it and say, wait, no, that number doesn't reflect, because they're not used to seeing it like that, and they feel exposed. And then what's interesting is then they go back and they find out that, oh, they made a mistake and they didn't report that data, or they made a manual error, but actually the system was accurate. And as they learn to trust that, light bulbs start going off, because you start to see, oh, wow, let's say I'm in charge of 10 retail stores, and now I know that I'm consolidating that. Now, is it exactly a real-time view? Not necessarily. And we have to be a little careful about romanticizing real-time data, because sometimes real-time can get very expensive and isn't realistic. So I still prefer the so-called right time phrase when it comes to this stuff. But as long as people understand, okay, I'm looking at, this information from this week, it's just been updated or whatever, and it's like, wow, this store is underperforming. Why? And now I can actually look into it and try to figure out why. And that kind of stuff, like in the past, really wasn't possible for a lot of companies. And so I find it fascinating to see companies go through these transitions. Now, of course, you can poke a lot of holes in this, because you can point out that even in an environment like that, you're arguably missing a lot of really important data, right? Because a lot of the data that's most important to decision doesn't live inside a transactional system, or even inside enterprise walls. You might argue that weather information and demographic information and social sentiment information and logistics information, all these things are really important to decisions. And so that's where it can get very complicated. But it is cool to see a little bit of progress go on. And it doesn't mean that companies make perfect decisions, but I have found it really instructive to see that transition towards, wow, we actually trust this data. So now we don't spend our meetings arguing about the data. We spend our meetings like planning and making decisions and talking about strategy and what the implications of this are. I find that fascinating, but I would acknowledge that once you get past companies of a certain size, it's very, very hard to find stories like that.
So Alan says that you should use quote when you use air quotes instead of just saying quotes.
Quotes.
Be more inclusive. But
Indeed, Alan. Thank you.
let me see if I understand where you come from on this. I mean, we need to make better decisions. We are subject to bullshit, to call it something, and we need a bullshit filter. We need to understand, the decision making, the data that goes into decision making, and how to improve that data. If I hear what you said correctly, and Alan actually asked us a similar question, I mean, you're saying that using these AI systems can help us improve the data. I'm not saying how, I'm saying can, because I don't think that we are that advanced that we can determine how, but we can determine whether by using these solutions and looking at the results and confronting those to human intuition and gut feeling and people knowing how the things work, we can come up with some sort of a BS filter against the data and improve the data, right? So then here we are, first step of this whole thing of decision-making framework. Let's get the right data in. Let's let's validate and vet what's being thrown our way. Let's run it through simple examples using AI or some other tools to see if it works or if it doesn't, and then we come up with good data. So now we are first step of the BS filter building. We have better data, information, knowledge, pick term, and to me it's all the same, right? So is that basically where we are? I mean, are we starting to get to that point? Because in the years that I've been an analyst, I can tell you that I spend 80% of my time playing that role of busting myth and rubber stamping assertions and validations from companies.
Well, I think when you say, are we getting to this point, I think what I would say to that is, I think we're getting to the point where if you have a specific purview in the enterprise, like if you're a CMO and you're looking at customer data and prospect data and things like that, yes, I think we're getting to the point where you can get serious about having a data platform initiative in that area and start getting better decision making results. And yes, I think AI and the opportunities of AI like put pressure on that and give organizations interest because of AI. And so I'm kind of suggesting that organizations exploit the interest in AI to work on their data problems, which we've been talking about for a long time, but have never really received adequate funding and resources and attention to solve. But what I am saying is, I think you have to start relatively small, which may fit into your show from a couple weeks that you have going on, and build some momentum, because you simply can't do this on a cross organization basis.
Okay.
And to address Alan's point, because I think it's a really important point, the fantasy is that, AI can also solve this problem by cleaning up our data. And by the way, Alan, thanks for these smart questions. If only that were the
No,
case.
you died. Your sound is gone, dude.
Wait, you can't hear me?
Oh, there you go. No, I can. Yeah.
Okay.
You went there for a second. Sorry.
All right. So as far as AI helping us with this problem, wouldn't that be great? Because then we could just say, oh, wow, AI is just so wonderful because it's cleaning up our data. And now it's making great predictions on the problem. Of course, is that AI can only help us a little bit with our data cleansing. It can help us a little bit because it can, for example, it can spot anomalies. Like, I'll give you a really simple example. Like in my Google context, AI found some duplicate records, and it also found all these records where it could automatically add an email address for me and stuff like that. But here's the thing, is that today's generations of AI don't really understand context, right? So the AI doesn't understand, for example, that my contacts, the way I maintain them, are simply for phone. I don't even want email addresses in there. It doesn't understand that, right? It doesn't have any concept of what I'm using the data for and what I care about. But what it can do at times is it can spot patterns and discrepancies. And so it could potentially surface duplicate records of various kinds and even merge those records for you. So I would say that it can help a little bit. But if I were to throw out a percentage, I would say right now that today's AI can help with 10 to 20% of data cleansing and tagging. And I'd like to see it get way, way higher than that. But it can, for example, it can tag content. The problem is that it won't always get the tags right. And some of the tags that we need on content are organization specific. And so that means you have to teach the AI what your organization specific tags are. So I would say 10 to 20% rather than more than that. So it's a small help, but it's still, data cleansing is what it is. It still involves people.
It's a little 20% is a little disenchanting, considering that the main value of a large language model is basically do that, to create the right tags and create the right taxonomy automatically from the content provided. I mean, RAG helps, small language models help, but if I invest in these technologies and they only give me 20% improvement, is that sufficient? I know that we have a big problem, but is that sufficient for me to commit resources to it?
Well, like I said, the good news is that there are some areas inside the enterprise where you have really good data and you don't need a lot of help cleaning it. And so in that case, what you do is you take an external large language model, or ideally one that's been built for your industry, and then you fuse it through RAG or other techniques with your customer specific data, and can get a pretty decent result. I mean, I did a use case on this with a insurance company that has a customer facing AI bot that's worked very well for them. And the reason that it's worked well is because their help documentation was outstanding. And so it didn't require a major data cleansing effort. And so they were able to make that work. And the result of that is exactly the kind of thing that today's AI is good for, which is getting rid of some of the first level crap. So the first level support queries went away, and now they spend more time with their support reps on the higher level stuff. And also their support reps do upselling too. And I don't poo-poo that, because it's helping them it's helping them financially. But this is the reason that I emphasize this, is because this is not an AI jobs apocalypse type of situation. This is not wiping out whole departments and stuff like that, but it's helping the humans do their jobs a bit better and have more value. Now, but here's the catch. They couldn't suddenly take that and do that for everything in their organization, because they don't have the data for that, and it doesn't work as well in other areas necessarily. So it doesn't mean that you can suddenly transform, but it means that in this area where they had good data, they could get a pretty good result.
So two things to that. First of all, I'm not poo-pooing. I'm having PTSD from the 2000s, natural language understanding, natural language processing. We had the exact same fucking conversations where we were like, how do you build a taxonomy? How do you build a thesaurus? How do you build a dictionary so you can actually answer with what you have and create quality content? And I'm not disagreeing. I think it's great that we finally get in there. I think that it's like giving me PTSD that I've been through this, battles before with different names, and we're still having the same battles. But the second one, and the one that I think is the most interesting for what you say, is like, to me, and I'm wrong on this because I'm taking the contrarian view, but to me, the biggest value of what we call AI, which is basically machine learning, is the ability to perform an immense scale of operations at an immense speed that we cannot achieve at a human level ever. I don't want to put 100,000 people to go look through my data to remove Bill Gates from every contact name, because I'm pretty sure that Bill Gates is not going to buy my widget, right? But I want the computer to be able to go through the data, find the patterns, and then clean it up. But to what you're saying, I think there's an incredible amount of value to that. I really do. Yeah. But I don't see that being done. I see we're changing the names, like you were just saying. We're changing the names of the technologies and the concepts, but we're still talking about the same. How do we get rid of the first order of noise so we can move to the second order of signal, right? And that's what I see. And this is also, to go full circle, this also goes back to, what is a BS filter,
What is a BS filter? I mean, to me, it's more and more complicated to do this in today's world, but it's important. And, I think one of the things that I really try to emphasize for people is that while your network of friends and associates is a valuable thing, please don't trust these big social sites like LinkedIn to surface the content that you need for you. Don't do that. It's not a content meritocracy out there. And I really worry about people who basically just do their jobs and then just look at the most popular thing on their feed and think they're informed on the issues. That's not going to work. I'm sorry. It's not. Like, most of the stuff that's popular in your feed is just like ass kissy irrelevance. It's not. It doesn't matter.
It's like, bullshit. It's absolute. That's why you need a bullshit filter, because the Billy
100%.
Oppenheimer post telling you how Matt Damon saved the world once like flying an airplane around the moon or whatever the hell all this like virtue signaling shit that we get in LinkedIn on a
Right.
daily basis
And
is.
look,
There's no value.
No, right. And you might through LinkedIn, you might get clued into some of the fiercest debates. So you might get clued into a couple of the most controversial topics because obviously those are going to have a lot of comments, and comments, the algorithm loves that. They engage, so-called engagement. So you're going to see that. But I can tell you, as someone who curates a weekly best of the enterprise every week, most of the best articles that I find every week come from my RSS reader, which I still maintain, which has more than 1,000 feeds, but they come directly from people's blogs. They don't come from the LinkedIn sewer. They come from blog posts like they always did, or podcasts or whatever. And so one of the biggest things is, is don't trust that. Like, understand there's deeper sources of information out there that are relevant and interesting. Seek those out, and have a commitment to discovery. Like, discovery is a big deal because you're being served up content via filter bubble, and you got to break out of it.
So I want to talk about that for a second, but I need to put Brent's comment and Alan's comment here to death here because it's pissing me off. Yes,
let's talk about your analyst background.
Well, I was a gardener for 10 fucking years. Drink everything you want. But I did not meet Bill Gates at that time. I met Billy, like we used to call them back then, in 1989, 1990, 1991 at Comdex, when I was part of the beta testing team for Word for Windows 2.0, which for most of you, this is before Windows, basically, all the way back then. And I was part of a team that was called the Gadfly team that were looking for the errors in like Word for Windows. And because we did that work, we were invited to have dinner with Bill Gates at Comdex in 1989 and 1990.
Wow.
So now that we've done that, and nobody gives a fuck about that, me even less than anybody else, let's talk about, you were talking about the blogs and finding the right content via blogs. I mean, isn't that like outdated shit in the age of video? I mean, do we still need blogs?
Well, I think we do. I mean, but the thing is, it's not so much that we need blogs necessarily. It's that we need people to think through enterprise problems and come up with sort of what they would say would be a step-by-step methodology to solve them. So, for example, in my fake news post, I actually spelled out, like, how do you build a BS filter? And I used some things from Carl Sagan, but I kind of defined the different elements of that. And I think for any enterprise problem, whether it's coming to better decisions or whatever, we need people to put out their proposed methods for how to approach that, so that you can, bang your head against that and see if you can appropriate it and use it and modify it. And that really can't, it's very difficult to do that as like a LinkedIn fart on your feed. You have to really put some thought into this, and whether that's ends up being a video or a PowerPoint or some combination of materials, I don't think that really matters. But yes, I don't think we're going to solve complex problems with short form content.
I agree that we need the filters. This is the BS filter that we're trying to build here. But I'm telling you, man, I'm trying to I'm trying to understand and define the model going forward that people can rely on for accurate information, right? This BS filters. I mean, I think that video is an incredible, valuable tool. I think that podcast, the audio only version of a video is incredible value. I think that blog posts are incredible value as well. They're all three are. I also think that I don't know a single executive that has time to either go through all three or pick one of the three, or like try to correlate or like cross tab one to the other. So then what? I mean, how do we do that? Is this a job that you're taking as part of what the Genomica does? Is this a job that a trusted advisor / whisperer needs to do, as far as like picking the right information to suggest to the people that masticate it and create a summary and a recommendation in addition to the original link? How do we? Because this to me is the biggest problem that executives have today. Executives today have a mediocre. There was an article that you posted through your feed that was a CEO leadership study that McKinsey did. I don't know if you read it or if you perused it, but basically executives have a very it's the second lowest level of trust on themselves of setting a vision. And the reason for this, in my opinion, is because it's getting too complicated and they don't have enough BS filters, don't have enough information. That's the thing. But so how do we solve this problem? This is the biggest problem to me. It's like, how do we solve the problem? It's like, getting the executives the right information in a timely manner so they can make the right decision.
Yeah, it's not a simple thing to do. I mean, and I think in many cases, like you need multiple like formats because people don't consume content the same way. But eventually, like like for example, if you and I have like an hour long discussion on this and you wanted to make it executive friendly, you'd probably need to pull out like a top 3 takeaways kind of thing from this and put it in some kind of a shorter form digest for that person. And so I think a lot about that with content, like longer form discussions that you can dig into, but then coming up with shorter form highlights that aren't just like, oh, can you believe what Esteban said? Like, because that's a fun thing to watch, but that doesn't really get to the bottom of it in terms of what an executive
That's right.
needs.
Yeah.
An executive needs kind of bullet points, takeaways, and stuff like that. And actually, to some extent, AI can actually help a little bit with that under supervision, because AI is actually pretty good at summarization of content. So if you challenge AI to say what's the top 3 points in this transcript, sometimes it can do a reasonable job at giving you a head start on that, or you can do it yourself. Um, and AI is also very good at doing the highlight clips that Brent is pointing out here. But I would argue those highlight clips are just a dipping your toe in the water. That's not really giving executives what
No,
they
that's
need.
that's a shiny bit outside of the value. If you the clip basically makes you go like, oh, that's an interesting comment. Where can I find more about it?
Yeah,
Right.
so I would argue that if I'm a smart executive, I have someone on my team that helps me curate information and put it in digestible forms for me. And and I also try to subscribe to things that break that down into like short digests for me. But Esteban, I would push back a little bit. I think once you get away from the CEO role, I'll accept what you're saying for CEOs, but for CXOs, CIOs, CFOs, CMOs, people like that, if they're not willing to do some content deep dives, I think they're in trouble. Like I think you have to challenge yourself, and I'm pretty sure a lot of those executives have time to watch NFL football games on the weekend and stuff like that. So I'm also pretty sure that they can dive into certain content. The challenge is to make that content relevant for them. But I do accept what you're saying on the CEO level. On the CEO level, I do think those folks require digested content, and that's where I would suggest that getting curations for their team is helpful. One reason why I write my weekly every week and pick the top 7 or so articles is so someone can quickly browse and see some of the top things that might be
Right.
relevant to them and stuff like that. But I would tend to agree that if you're going to create longer content, you also have to think about how to bullet point that content to make it easy for people to get the points.
So here's something interesting. I would challenge that a little bit. I think that for mid-size and smaller end of the enterprise, yes, you're right. The CEO is the only one that's challenged that way. Take a company like Procter and Gamble. You take a company that is like larger than that at a corporate level, not at a product level. You have a CMO for product by product and all that stuff. That's
Yep.
still the same as a smaller enterprise. But large organizations with executives in charge of 50, 60,000, 200,000 people departments with
Mm-hmm.
20 directs and like 200 sub reports and everything. They're in the same place as the CEO is, because their role is to actually take one part of what the CEO is looking for, and they
Mm-hmm.
still need that level of information. So I would not define it in the way that it's only for CEOs. I think that the large executives all need it. And if I'm going to go further, and this may be self-serving more than anything, I think that every executive needs it. Either whether it's internal or external, you need somebody that will like masticate it for you and give you what you need, that understands
Mm-hmm.
you and understands what you need. And I have to
Sure.
say, the last thing about this, right? I mean, my time at SAP, which is not Gardner brand, so I can say SAP, right? My time at SAP, one of the things that I learned is that all the 7 members of the executive board have teams that they actually do this for each one of them in their respective
Yeah.
things. And I haven't seen that in any other organization at that level.
Right.
I may see a chief of staff who's overwork and underwhelming what it delivers, but like creating an entire staff to deliver to you the information, I think that that's critical.
Oh yeah, for sure. And look, I mean, I'm not arguing against the importance of like people executives getting curated information. I think that is incredibly important.
Yeah.
I'm pushing back a little bit because I think that for the most part, unless you have a massive set of responsibilities. You need to be willing to do some deep dives at times. Now,
Absolutely, yes.
now the thing I would say though is that they need to be kind of directed deep dives. Like I'm not at all saying that person should be watching our show. It would be more like take your Procter and Gamble example. It would be like, oh, I'm going to sit in on this retail trends webinar that my curator said was really substantial and high quality. And so at that point, once you've been pointed towards that, I do think you will need to dig into that deeper content at times, only because like that is where it happens. But sometimes it happens more in interactive peer groups as well. So part of this, and part of what I encourage a lot of vendors to do, which they mostly don't do, which is too bad, is to facilitate more peer group conversations around industries and roles, because a lot of the ways that these folks prefer to learn is in that kind of a context of swapping stories and swapping, war stories about projects and stuff like that. And to me, the real gold is when you can make that happen. And if you're a really great curator, you're also a facilitator, and you're making those things happen where you're putting people in the same room or the same virtual room even at times and saying, here's your chance to have an off the record discussion where you can really share your struggles. And if people think that those kinds of people are on LinkedIn, I'm going to tell you they're not. They might have a placeholder on that, but they're not sharing these kinds of things on LinkedIn, right? Because if they do, it's like flypaper. They're going to get like 5 salespeople and 3 recruiters and everything else. Those kinds of people aren't actively participating in any social forum. And so it has to be more private networks for them.
So let me hold on for a second, and also this question here, because I want to kind of like a summary. So we're so far. We talked about the building the BS filter and needing good data. We talk about how we can actually leverage AI and other tools to begin to identify the good data and clean it a little bit and understand better. And this is a key part: understand better what we need, so we can actually get the systems to provide us that. And I love to talk about that with you, and I'll tell you in a second. But this is a key question, right? Does the speed of change taking place mean that execs need to change their traditional approach to information consumption? Yes or no? Simple question. Just yes or no.
Yes.
What do you think? Yes, I agree.
Definitely.
I totally agree. I think that from the days where like the PC week used to circulate with like in an envelope with like sticky notes to mark the right articles, which you know what I'm talking about. To today, there's a different more consumption. But what I want to talk about is what you just said. You were, if I'm not mistaken, if not the original, one of the very first people to be part of SAP Mentors, which still to this day remains one of the best examples, in my opinion, in the enterprise of what you're talking about. Basically peer groups sharing information on how things work and all that stuff. You built it. I mean, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that you are one of the original people. This is how you became the famous Jon ERP and Jon Reed and the Brohaimer. But you built it. And I think I agree with you 100%. We need that more than anything, not at an executive level, because we have too many, networking groups that don't go anywhere, but at a second or third tier level where like the real information sharing happens. I mean, can we forget about AI? AI sucks for this. This is like, true human shit that AI cannot do. Can we, do you think that we can actually make this a critical priority for the enterprise or for the organization over the next few years, to understand that these things are more than just a cute marketing community where you can pepper people with like marketing messages? Can we get there?
I think we can, especially inside of certain organizations. I mean, these kinds of leadership and mentor programs are still pretty rare, because most of the programs that you see are more about elevating technical competencies like Microsoft MVPs and Oracle ACEs, and those things have their place to some extent as well.
Yeah.
But I think this notion of how you cultivate leadership groups and peer groups inside of organizations that become kind of advocacy groups inside and outside your company is a fascinating concept, and you can do it. The problem that you run into in some organizations is that it can be hard sometimes to unmuzzle those people enough to make it worth their while to speak out and to say what the problems are and what they're running into. And so, like, I think that's a challenge that SAP's grappled with a lot over the years with that. And I think, the more unmuzzled those groups are, the better they work. But even if it's a little more of a confidential group, there's still value. Like, so for example, I talk I haven't been in the mentor program in a long time now, but And one of the reasons I left is because I felt like some of the more open conversations weren't happening anymore. And I really valued having these conversations out in the open a little more. And what I heard from the more recent mentor people that I talk with back channel is they're still deriving value as a group. And I think the executives are still deriving value too, because there's a dialogue between the executives and the mentors internally that's a back channel dialogue that does help the executives serve their customers better, because these mentors are experts, right? And they understand very specific technology areas and specific business areas, and they relay that feedback. So that's great. The thing that's missing from that now that I would like to see that most organizations don't have, not just SAP, is a little more of a public forum around that too, where there's more engaging the community around this dialogue as well. And that's kind of missing at the moment. But the model still works and it's still happening inside of SAP to this day. And so I think it's an incredibly valuable way to engage executives, along with things like analyst programs, like some of the smart vendors. They really engage in very open discussions between their executives and analysts, and those discussions can get pretty heated sometimes, and it's really interesting. But it makes everyone smarter, right? And it's not like all the analysts agree with each other either. I mean, people disagree about topics on how we go forward. They even disagree on, how effective AI is in certain scenarios. Let's have those debates, and those are highly beneficial. And the more we can have those, the better.
So you mentioned the smart vendors. I'm assuming you're referring to Soho, the Soho Day that they did last week, as one example, not the only example, but one example of executives and analysts and pundits and influencers coming together.
Yep.
Unfortunately, I couldn't make it to that one, but it was well received from abroad in the information that received. I talked to a lot of people that were there, and I got a lot of information. But most vendors don't do that.
Right. They don't, but it's not outside the scope to pursue that. And it depends on the culture of the vendor, right? And look, I mean, I know there's some vendor executives that don't enjoy those kinds of dialogues. They don't enjoy getting challenged. And to that I would say, I hope your product is really, really good, and hope you understand your customer really, really well, because otherwise I think you're screwed. Because that kind of outside in feedback, to me, if you don't welcome that, I really wonder how you got to the point that you got as an executive, because I think you need that. And so like I said, if your product is awesome, or maybe you're in a very monopolistic market, and maybe you run an airline or something, and there's only 2 other airlines that service the hubs that you serve, maybe you're in pretty good shape. But for the most part, like I don't, maybe you're Comcast, but for the most part, I don't like those your chances. And so the point is, like, so I talk with a lot of vendors about this and advise them on, like, not obviously they're already working with analysts, because you have to work with the Gartners of the world and the Forresters of the world and get on the waves and the quadrants and that whole game. But the whole thing is, like, would you like to have more open conversations that really give your executives a gut check on what they're doing, from a really smart group of, like, independent analysts that have very strong points of view and deep research? And a lot of times, like, I talked to someone yesterday about this, and they said once they try it, they want more of it. Like, that's the typical experience there, that dialogue is proved so valuable. But until you've tried it, you don't know. And so you have to try it. And I would say for most companies, if they try to put those things in place, they're going to like it. Unless, like I said, there's certain kinds of executives in very close cultures that don't want to hear second opinions. So
I agree with Brent on this comment. I think you're speaking truth to power. And then here's the deal. This is not the original intent of the show, but this is hitting very, very close to home, because I'm in the process of trying to air quotes, reinvent myself, to be more inclusive, like Alan requested, to air quotes, reinvent myself, in the process that I think that the analyst gig is dead. I don't think there's value in being an analyst, not because the analysts are good or bad, which some of them are and some of them are not, but because the companies that are running the analyst gig lost track of the moral compass. They went for, like, more money in more products, more leveraging, lower level quality of analysts in exchange for more revenue that props up the stock price, as opposed to what used to be when Gideon Gardner first started, and when in the early days, when it was just like delivering value to executives that they couldn't get any other way. The internet fucked up most of the analyst world. and video did the rest. And now we have people that are like, far superior to analysts that are not analysts going all over the place, so I'm trying to reinvent myself away from the analyst world. And what I'm finding, and this is why it's relevant to what you're saying, is like, this concept, speaking truth to power, is not an analyst trait as much as it used to be anymore. Right. I mean, they need to protect their revenue streams. They need to protect, what they get and all that stuff. And to be frank, a lot of executives don't want that from analysts anymore. So what is this like, hopefully new model that I'm trying to create, that you're developing, as well within the genomic and what you do? Is there room for this to be the next generation of like truth to power that is not, what's the word that I'm looking for? Programmatic, structure, enterprise ready or whatever. Is there something that's necessary there, or are we just like, tilting windmills just for the purpose of like, killing the giants?
Well, I think with anything like this, you have to. I mean, and I would push back a little bit in the sense that I think like where I think we lose a lot with today's analysts. I think some of the back channel conversations can still be pretty vigorous, even if you're getting paid. But like we lose a lot in the public domain these days. We don't get a whole lot of really open conversations in public. But even in private, to your point, some people hold their fire. But I do see more open stuff in private NDA sessions. But what I would say is that when you're gonna put people in conversations that are perhaps difficult or challenging for them, you do want to be able to point to a little bit of a results testimonials thing of like, yeah, in past conversations with certain leaders, like we came to certain really important conclusions that really helped them with this or that, right? Because the whole point of these conversations is not to just drag people over the coals. It's to help them avoid making huge mistakes, manage risk, and make better decisions, identify new opportunities, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
So I've seen these situations happen where a vendor emerged from conversations like this with a whole new go-to-market tagline and campaign, or identifying a whole market segment that they overlooked. For example, I talk with one vendor, and this is not even not a client or anything like that, but I was like, you're really overlooking this opportunity in the QuickBooks market, because in the US, QuickBooks is really strong arming customers in the cloud. And I provided a lot of specifics because I happen to be a customer. So like in that case, it was like an overlooked market opportunity. And so I think a big part of this is showing that these aren't just like having tough conversations for the sake of being tough and all that. It's having conversations that lead to a better business direction and result. And so you do have to be able to point to testimonials and how this has helped other companies, so that companies understand, yeah, I could get a result from this, and then they experience it, and then you see for themselves if they like it or not. And I think a lot of executives really do value these, but I will concede you this point, which is that when they're riding high in the stock market, they don't tend to listen as well.
Yeah, I know.
So,
and actually, and something you said earlier also, the need to insulate yourself from the riffraff and the noise by putting somebody to pre-chew and summarize and point you in the right direction makes it incredibly hard for you to actually shine through. Whereas I used to have in the older days maybe access to like half an hour, maybe an hour meetings once in a while. Everything that I do that has value for an executive today is done in 15-minute intervals, because that's all they're allowed, given their situation, right? And I, like you said, I got many incredible, valuable insights through that way that changed the way they do things, but it's just really hard to get through to that. So, and that's not only my problem; that's a problem for any content creator. Going back to like what I think it was. Hold on a second. Where is it? Oh, they put too much shit about Bill Gates and not enough of the stuff that I wanted to. But hold on a second. This part, kind of like this part. The traditional approach to information consumption. I mean, we're falling down the sidelines for that, right? So this part. I mean, are we creating too much just for creating content, right? And then an executive won't listen. So. I think the differentiation, and this goes back to your concept of BS filter and everything we're talking about in the last couple of minutes. We need to find the model, the framework in which the right voices, the right information, shine through. We were talking about earlier about creating this BS filter. We were talking earlier about, clean the data to get to that. We're talking about, maybe even leveraging communities and better people to get into that. So let's try to bring it together for the first part of the show. We'll do another one. I think you and I have another one on the books for April 2nd, and we'll continue this conversation then. But, for the first part of the show, if we take all these pieces, what does it look like to build this framework for executive decision making? And we got maybe 3 minutes before we had to start wrapping up. So.
Well, I think it's a little bit different. Like I talked about, for companies, it's about having agreed upon set of facts in some place that's accessible, where you can look at it, dashboards or analytics. For an individual, for an executive who wants to stay in touch and I think it's really about a context that's constantly changing. And so what we need is a model that adapts to the context. And so that means that if I'm working with Esteban, for example, and maybe a couple other peers on making better decisions, I want to have a constant back channel. So I might have occasional briefings or whatever, structured time, but I might also want a Slack channel or whatever it is, or LinkedIn messaging or whatever. But I want to, when news goes down, I want to be like, Esteban, what do you think of this? There's got to be this constant dynamic flow. And I think that's one of the things that's really been missing from the traditional model is let's do all our quantitative research and put out a big study and then try to make sense of the study. And by then the world has gone by. So I think we need an adaptable context, and then the ability to make sense of everything that comes in as we go. And that is everything from the sources that we turn to the individual relationships that help us make sense. So we have to build that network out.
I agree with you. I mean, obviously, selfishly, I agree with you because I want to be part of the network, but also it's just, I'm finding a lot of challenges in the way the model used to work and the new model, how it's working. And I feel like I'm contending with more noise than I ever have in this. This is why, whether you call it the BS filter, or the way to vet, or the way to right in land in the right place at the right time. This
is like a horrible buzzword, but it's like that micro briefing thing of instead of a 1 day briefing once a year, we need this more dynamic thing that's always happening. We need this constant flow.
I know that people are going to get drunk because I'm going to say, when I was a Gartner analyst, Brent, for you, drink away. But when I was an analyst, I would have welcomed any vendor that wanted to do that versus once a year buy a consulting day, or once a year get a mega briefing with the parade for 12 hours, everything they do, expecting me to retain anything. I mean, the long-term, interaction is what actually gets value, nothing else,
Absolutely.
Yeah. So anyways,
now we are done, dude.
It's not. So what I want to do is I'm going to close with this. So Maureen is quoting you, something you said earlier, hard to make it worthwhile to unmuscle. Amen. And I think that this is the core of building a BS filter. They're actually bringing the running people into building a BS filter. It's you need to be able to present yourself in a way that is worthwhile listening to you, and that there's value. And then you need to find, and this is the part that I'm trying to figure out, you need to find the commercial model to what you do so that people can actually do it. I mean, you have the Genomica has a commercial model built behind, and it's a great platform for you to expose what you are and who you are. And I think that there's a need for something else like that, and I can't figure out what it is, but we're going to continue trying on April 2nd. We are out of time. Anything that I didn't cover for today that you think we should have said? No, we're good.
No, I agree with you. We got to build more models, but the conversations are vital. So at least we can start there.
Yeah. So, and now this show is complete. Thank you very much for listening. I really appreciate it. We'll see you next week with Trisha Wang and Dr. Lauren Vargas. They're going to be talking about evolving. I wish I had a better handwriting. The evolving landscape of AI skills and how we are going to evolve the enterprise towards taking advantage of AI. Thank you very much for listening today, and we are out.